Welcome to Cascadia Daily News. Today we're here with Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson, the Democratic candidate for governor. With me are Ron Judd, CDN's executive editor, Cynthia Pope, our publisher, and reporter Annie Todd, who is covering the governor's race. Ron and Cynthia are the voting members of the editorial board.
We appreciate your participation and welcome to Bellingham.
Thanks. Appreciate a chance to chat with y'all. Appreciate it.
So thanks for submitting those your answers to those questions. Just to expand just a bit on some of those, the first question was, should a woman have access to abortion, and what about cases of life and health-threatening pregnancies? Your answer was quite a ringing endorsement of supporting that position. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. But thanks again for doing this. I appreciate it. And appreciate the fact that you have feedback from your readers and the folks in the community with the questions, which I appreciate as well. And I also appreciate that's the first question, which I noticed on what you sent out, because look, in a landscape with the United States Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, a very fundamental freedom enjoyed by millions of Americans for decades was stripped away. And a couple things I'd want to say to it. Number one is, elections are important, and one of the reasons they're important is they offer a choice to voters. And on reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms, there could not be a clearer choice between myself and Dave Reichert. I'll highlight just a few of the differences. Number one, I'm proud to be pro-choice, proud to be the only candidate endorsed by Planned Parenthood and Pro-Choice Washington. I'm proud that as Attorney General, I took on the Biden administration to ensure access to mifepristone, which of course is the abortion medication used in more than half of abortions. I'm not afraid to take on a president of my own party to ensure access to that. Why do we have to do that? Because a federal judge in Texas was about to rule that mifepristone should be banned nationwide. And so this is important to this question, which is, what you'll hear Dave Reichert say is, well, hey, reproductive rights aren't being threatened here in Washington state. We have laws that protect our reproductive freedoms. Honestly, that's a bunch of BS, right? This federal judge in Texas issued a nationwide ban on mifepristone. Guess what? That would have applied to Washington state. Why did it not apply to Washington state? Because we filed our own lawsuit here in federal court in Spokane to maintain that access. We had a governor who bought multiple years worth of mifepristone as a backup just in case our lawsuit was not successful, right? So these issues matter here in Washington state. Number two, Dave Reichert, when he's in Congress, he does not like me to remind the people of the state of these votes, but he voted 3 times for a nationwide abortion ban that criminalizes doctors. 3 times he did that. He did that while he was, after running for Congress, there's a debate video of him with Darcy Berner in which he's asked about choice, and he says, this issue settled, Roe v. Wade. We're never gonna touch that issue, it's settled. Well, guess what? He went after it 3 different times and voted 3 times to ban abortions that are legal here in Washington state and criminalize doctors. So, look, I guess last thing I'll say, I could go on about this, I think it's an important one, but a lot of freedoms are at stake in our country and in our state. We need to elect leaders who share the values of the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians who want to defend our freedoms while still leaning into all the challenges we face as a state, and I'm sure those questions are coming as well. But this is a stark contrast between myself and Dave Reichert.
Quick follow-up on that. One of the issues that has arisen since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, some states have enacted laws that would criminalize women leaving a state that does not allow abortions to go to a state like Washington
Yes.
that does. How would you as a governor protect the rights of those women?
So a couple things on that issue. So I appreciate you asking about that because one thing I've said publicly many times since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade is that those who oppose reproductive freedom will stop at nothing until reproductive freedom is taken away from every woman in the United States, okay? And they'll use whatever tools they have to do that, including the example you're talking about, right? Trying to criminalize folks or prosecute folks who try to come to Washington state, for example, to ensure they have full range of reproductive access and freedom. And so as a governor, what I'll say a couple things is the legislature and the governor have done a good job already in light of that Dobbs decision to try and tighten up laws that we have. So I'll give you an example. There's a law that I proposed that passed the state legislature a year ago when in a post-Dobbs world, we were looking at all of our state laws to make sure we're tightening those up in light of that Dobbs decision. And one thing we discovered when doing our research was if you're a woman who uses an app to track your period. Very common, right? Guess what? That personal information, deeply personal information you're putting into that app, guess what? It's not protected. There's no HIPAA around that personal medical information you're putting into that app. Whoever has that app can sell it off or turn it over, to your question, to a prosecutor in Idaho who might want to prosecute you using that information. So I proposed a law that said, no, you've got protections around that information, essentially just like if you went to a doctor's office, that's protected. For what it's worth, every Republican in the state legislature voted against that. Every single one of them, okay? But that's an example of the state taking some measures. Number two, so governor has to be vigilant to make sure we are making sure that the providers here in Washington state have the protections, to make sure that women who come to our state have all the protections we can as a state offer. That's going to require working with our next attorney general, for sure. The AG has certain powers that a governor doesn't have, right? But having a relationship between the governor and the AG, and frankly, having a governor who understands the role of the office attorney general, knows the powers of that office, knows the personnel in that office, will be tremendously helpful. So we've worked closely with the governor, with the legislature on trying to tighten up our laws. But we as a state can make sure that we're helping financially with those providers to make sure they can meet the growing demands that we have, especially what we're seeing right now. It's happening in real time along the border with Idaho. This is not a hypothetical, to your point. This is a real thing that's happening. And so having a governor who sort of embraces that, the importance of that, and making sure we're doing everything we can to protect those individuals, but also the providers, will be critical.
Ron, you have questions?
About this issue?
About any issue.
No, I did have a quick follow-up to your answer, Bob, about healthcare. You said that you wanted to eliminate barriers and stifle competition, which is a phrase I hear a lot from people in all parties when it comes to healthcare. Can you give us a couple examples of what barriers exist in this state and what you would do about those? Or just one example of something that's a major problem?
Sure.
Stifling competition in healthcare.
Sure.
We have kind of a monopoly system in our county. Not designed that way, but it's worked out that way. And a lot of people are focused on the lack of options, and competition is a big front burner issue here.
Agreed. I'll try and keep this relatively short, but so first, yes, you sort of embrace the premise of the question that this is a big issue all across the state. And so I've been to all 39 counties, the only candidate to beat all 39 counties, and I hear this frequently as I travel around the state. Number two, in the AG's office, we've actually grown my antitrust team. So this is the team that actually brings cases along these lines. We'd never done these cases before. I want to be clear. When I became Attorney General, we had 3 lawyers, I think, doing antitrust work. Okay, it's a much larger team now, to put it mildly. And that team has actually brought cases all across the state where we have seen consolidation that is illegal, right? That limits competition and that limits options for consumers. Now, obviously, there is a very specific legal requirement. We have to show that, hey, some sort of a merger is not just, hey, a natural part of what happens in business, but something that is stifling competition, okay? There's obviously a legal criteria, but we have brought those cases and have not been afraid to bring those cases to make sure we maintain that competition, and been successful at those cases, by the way. Recovered millions of dollars and helped preserve that competition. Number two, there's legislation right now, the Keep Our Cares Act, that was proposed in the state legislature last year, get my years straight. I believe it passed the House or the Senate, but not the other chamber. I get it mixed up sometimes. But a bill that would, oversimplifying a little bit, put additional oversight onto these kinds of consolidations and gives a role to the AG's office to specifically review those, okay? That's a bill that I support and would think would be an important one. As a governor, I'll lean into that as a governor. I support that as Attorney General, that specific legislation that will make a big difference on addressing these. And so, once again, that is an issue that combines both the state, the legislature taking action, but also you'll want an Attorney General, your next Attorney General, who is continuing that work. Because often, in my experience, is you can have the laws on the books, but you've got to have the enforcement side of it. That's why we've beefed up our antitrust division to bring these cases. And candidly, I did that just internally with the resources of my office. As a governor, I'll put more resources into that antitrust division, right? It's a very, very modest investment to get a handful more attorneys and investigators and professional staff who can then bring these kind of cases and review more of those cases all around the state.
That sort of answered the question that I would have asked
Yeah.
to follow up, which is that you have brought these cases, and some successfully as an Attorney General, but as Governor, you said, the enforcement has to be there, but do you feel that the legal parameters now are sufficient for the next Attorney General to make those kind of cases? Should they be improved? Is there something that can be done there?
That's a good question. What I would say is, well, I mentioned the Keep Our Cares Act. So that's a specific state law that could be changed that does give additional enforcement authority to the AG, okay? And I support that. So that's a very specific change that still needs to be made. What I would also say is, the state, of course, right? We have our own resources as a state government, right? To be, hey, listen to people, reviewing what's going on, putting resources behind that as well. And the budget to increase the antitrust team in the AG's office, those are all very specific steps that we can and frankly, we should be taking. But again, I will emphasize, as an office, when I inherited the office in 2013, the idea that we could take a case like that and just block a merger, that was not work that we did in any way, shape, or form. It just didn't happen at all. Now, the team routinely reviews these, but more resources would be helpful. Those cases are very labor intensive, you can imagine. It's very technical, expert heavy. It takes a lot of work to bring even one of those cases.
Right. Thank you.
And by the way, I should also add just in brief that, hey, there have been other consolidations that we have reviewed, and if we don't see a violation of the law, then okay, so there's a lot of work that happens that isn't seen necessarily by the public, but when we think there is a violation, we brought those and been successful.
Okay. Annie, I know you've been covering this race. I know you have some questions.
Always. Okay. Yeah, so Attorney General, neither you nor your opponent have ever lost an election. Will you accept the result of the election if you do lose?
I will. I won't be happy about it, but I will. I will accept it. But I appreciate you asking that. I appreciate asking that question. And for what it's worth, Dave Riker and I have our disagreements, but I have the sense that he would, that he would. I mean, he'll have to speak for himself, but I've not heard him suggest anything differently. We have plenty of disagreements, but no, of course, we'll accept the results.
Yeah, and then. You've spoken a little bit about your past as the Attorney General, and in the last 12 years, you've done a lot for that office, and including the work that you're doing right now with the antitrust lawsuits, as well as the investigations into the Catholic Church with the sex abuse. How do you expect to distance yourself from the Attorney General's office when you've shaped so much of it over the past 12 years?
Well, that's a good question. I've been campaigning for over a year. You think you've heard every question you're going to get asked. I've not been asked it quite that way. I get asked about the AG's office a lot. It's a good question. I guess I want to be thoughtful on how to answer. So of course there's going to be a new Attorney General, and the Attorney General is an independent actor. Makes his or her own decisions on many issues. But what I would say is I'm not sure if I'd use the word distance myself in a sense because look, Governor Inslee and I talk all the time. Right? We have standing meetings. We go over what's going on, whether it's us defending the state, if there's a legal challenge against the state, or obviously cases we are potentially bringing proactively. The latter are my decisions, right? If we're filing one of those antitrust cases, that's firmly my decision, right? Sometimes the governor's the client, right? Or Governor Inslee's making decisions. My job with my team is to give legal options to the governor. It's his decision. And sometimes that line isn't black and white. Whose decision is it? You have to work that out. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily distancing, right? Because it's a critical office, and the governor and the attorney general need to work together closely on all sorts of issues. That's just natural. So hopefully, my experience as attorney general will help. But to your point, I think what you're also getting at is, hey, Bob, are you gonna mind your own business? Let the AG do their own work. And I do hear that. And I think I'm gonna be plenty busy if I'm elected governor with the issues I have. And I also think, though, it will be helpful to. For example, Noah Purcell's the Solicitor General. I hired him when I first got elected. He's still there. He's the best Solicitor General in the country. I'm confident he'll still be there. I'm confident Nick Brown's going to win and Noah will still be there. I feel that is helpful that this person I know very, very well and trust his judgment implicitly is someone I'll be talking to on a regular basis about, hey, defending state initiatives or defending state laws, and he and I can finish each other's sentences, right? That's a useful thing, and hopefully I will be mindful of respecting the next AG's decision making, right? But I think that relationship will hopefully serve me and my team well as we navigate the issues we're talking about. That all interact with the AG's office. They just do, and so hopefully that will be helpful knowing how the office actually works. Yeah. But I'll miss the office. I will. I'll confess to that. It's a great office and a very high-functioning office. The team does great work.
Yeah. And then, looking at the cost of living crisis, I think residents across the state
Yeah.
and Whatcom County have been very vocal about the issues that they're facing.
Yep.
A couple of your policy proposals aim to tackle those issues while also spending taxpayer money to do so. So how do you remain mindful of the needs facing residents, but also keeping in mind the governor's budget?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple things I would say is that, I think throughout my time in politics, and I've been involved in politics for 20 years, I think I've been pretty laser focused on trying to make life more affordable for the people that I represent. In the AG's office, if we resolve a case, the money doesn't just go to the state budget, we put money back in the pockets of Washingtonians. That's where it goes every single time. If we can identify consumers who are harmed, that's where that money goes, to try and make things a bit more affordable for those folks. So as a governor, I'm mindful that we need to make sure we're running a state that strives to meet that mission of making things more affordable. Pick your issue, affordable housing. Like literally, if I have to pick the issue I heard the most in going to all 39 counties, literally, affordable housing was the issue I heard the most, right? So look, I put in my voters pamphlet statement in black and white, we're gonna construct 200,000 units of new housing of all kinds, from the unhoused, affordable housing, market rate, 200,000 units in my first 4 years as governor. Some of my team said, Bob, why are you putting that in black and white in your voters pamphlet statement? Someone might say later on you didn't meet that goal. No, we're gonna lean into that goal because we need to make that happen. That will make life a bit more affordable for folks who need to buy a home or rent a place in Washington State so they can be close to where they work, for example. And so, I think as a governor, being mindful of that is important. Number two, adopting a budget, adopting a budget that has that in mind. When I was on the King County Council, look, it's not a state budget, but it's still, I think it was $5 billion when I was there. I think it's something like that. Look, when I was budget chair, we had a budget that the Republicans and the Democrats on the county council voted for. And take my word for it, there are Republicans on that county council who were about as far apart as me politically, but they voted for a budget that I put together working with them. So I'm mindful of making sure we have a budget that's within our means, but doing what we need to do to make life a little bit better for Washingtonians. And in my office, I just will conclude with this is, we have grown our antitrust team. We have created a civil rights enforcement team. We've created an environmental enforcement team. Our consumer protection team is so much larger than it used to be. I didn't go to the state legislature asking for money. I found ways within our budget to make that happen. The Tri-City Herald said it best. They did a whole editorial about it, and they said Ferguson's running his office like a business. We found ways to do that, to grow those divisions, to better serve the people, put money back in the pockets of the people, but not going to the legislature and asking for a handout to make it happen.
Yeah, got it. And then, so there are a variety of statewide initiatives on the ballot this year. How do you plan to vote on these initiatives? And if either the capital gains tax or the long-term care programs are repealed, how are you going how would your administration respond to that?
I guess there's sort of two questions there. So on the first question was the initiatives, how to vote. I'm going to vote no. I'm against on the first three that came up there, like Climate Commitment Act. I'm voting no, so I'm voting to preserve the Climate Commitment Act. I always got to make sure I'm saying that the right way. And the most recent one I haven't even looked at. I know there's a new one that's just got out there, and I just haven't looked at that one yet. But the other three, I'm a no vote on all three of those. Capital gains tax, for example. Then I think your question goes to if, for example, capital gains tax or climate commitment act are repealed, budget implications. Part of the reason why I oppose the repeal of, for example, the capital gains tax is because I think that's an example of a revenue where the resources come from a tiny sliver of our population, the most wealthy, and brings in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for kids and for programs all around the state of Washington. My opponent supports repealing that. I hope if he comes in, you ask him how he would actually cover that budget gap, because there is no easy way to do that. Climate Commitment Act, same thing, right? As you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, paid for by big corporations, right? That they have to pay, and that helps move our economy to a green economy, pays for jobs, improves our economy. So if those were to both fail, or one of them was to fail, look, clearly as a governor, you just have to grapple with a huge hole in our budget and the implications from that. I can't prejudge that, right? Obviously I have to get in there, see what the budget is, and the overall budget outlook before making determinations. But what I'll say is, I think you can, someone's past performance is your best indicator of future action. And, when I was a budget chair, we got a budget done in a way that was responsible, that Republicans voted for, Democrats voted for, that we thought was appropriate for revenues, but also appropriate for how we're spending that money. And that's the approach that I'd be taking as governor. But obviously we hope it doesn't come to that. But But I think that's just why I just have to cross that bridge when it comes to it, right? Yeah, but that would be a challenge. That's part of the reason why I oppose the repeal.
Yeah. And then, you've got a ton of policy proposals in place. Like your website is just littered with them, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, hopefully not, yeah.
But how do you prioritize some of those policies within your first 100 days of office?
Oh, sure. So that's a couple of things I'd say. So first 100 days, keep in mind, right, if I'm whoever gets elected governor and they come in, Governor Inslee's already proposed a budget. That's already gone to the legislature. You parachute into the first day of the session, essentially, which is a little bit, I'm not sure what the word is, but that's, you know what I mean? It's not my budget that the legislature is looking at, right? So in giving thought to what that first 100 days looks like, I think one, at least from my perspective, one has to be very focused on top priorities, right? Because it's not my budget. I didn't have the chance to work that all up and work the legislature for that. It's going to be different than the future years, right? Which is very different. So from my standpoint, I think given the circumstances of when you come in for those first 100 days, it's going to be important to your question, really prioritize amongst all these ideas we have to what's going to be most critical. And so a couple that I would highlight would be number one, the housing issue that I mentioned before. So I've been very specific about the amount of housing we have to have. The state needs to be investing in that. The good news is when I've met with folks all across the state, they want to help. When I've met with executives from Microsoft, for example, first issue they want to talk about was affordable housing. And it wasn't saying, Bob, solve this if you're governor. They're like, we want to help. We'll do public-private partnerships. This is important for our workforce. We have a problem with attracting folks because they can't afford the housing here. So the good news is we have the business community that wants to help on this issue as well. So it's good for jobs, it's good for our economy, and it's good for the people. So those investments in that first budget will be a top priority. Number two, a top priority that we'll have in that very first session, those first 100 days to your question, would be assisting local law enforcement with hiring more law enforcement officers. I think I can't remember if this was one of the questions you all asked in advance, but Washington State ranks last per capita in number of law enforcement officers we have as a state per capita. That's not where we should be ranking. And what a couple of states have done is put money in their state budgets to help local jurisdictions hire more law enforcement officers. That can be signing bonuses, that can be increased salaries. And so that'll be a priority of mine, is to put that into a budget to work with the legislature. I think we'll have support from both Democrats and Republicans on that. And then local jurisdictions can draw from that. State troopers, that's one that the governor has more control over, obviously, right? That's state, right? And so I'll be making sure that our state budget reflects a priority of increasing the number of troopers that we have as well. So if I was going to start with sort of two top priorities right out of the gate in the first 100 days, those would be the two that I point to. But you're right, it'll be, and a lot will depend on your earlier question. Hey, what's our budget situation, right? There's a lot of factors that go into it, but those will be two top priorities no matter what.
Yeah. My final question for you. So Governor Inslee is the longest serving governor currently with 12 years, 3 terms. Would you consider term limits in the future for constitutional offices?
It's interesting, term limits. I'm not sure I've been asked that one either on the campaign, so you've got two of them. I've never been a fan of term limits. I just always, I just think let the people decide. If you've been there too long. The first time I ran for office was against a 20-year incumbent on the King County Council, a Democrat, by the way, chair of the King County Council. Not the easiest way into politics, but part of what motivated me to run was, hey, she's been there a long time, and she just ran unopposed every 4 years. I thought someone doesn't get a challenge. Well, guess what? I ran and was able to win. So I'm kind of a believer in that. And so I guess I'd say of all the issues that's facing the state, term limits for our statewide offices is not on my list. I can't pretend to have a strong view on it. Look, if the people want to have term limits, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. And I do think in my time as AG, do I think 12 years was the right amount of time? If I wasn't running for governor, I just kind of had a feeling 12 years, if I don't get elected, I'll miss it. If I hadn't run for governor, I would have missed it. But I felt 12 years was, for me, felt like the right time for somebody new to come in. I think Governor Inslee felt the same way about being governor. But I've not been a big fan of term limits. Yeah.
Cynthia, I know you have a question.
Yes, Mr. Ferguson, you have, I think it's fair to say you've long been the heir apparent to the Inslee governor's administration. How would your administration differ from Governor Inslee's?
Sure. So for what it's worth, I don't think of it as being like an heir to an Inslee administration. Just to be clear, I'm proud to have the governor's support, and I've obviously worked closely with him on a wide range of issues and have a great deal of respect for the governor, to be clear, and for Trudy Inslee. But we're two different people, right? We're just two different people. Any more that when you take a job, you're different than the person who came before you. You've got your own priorities, you've got your own way of doing things and thinking about things. And so for me, in coming into any job, when I became Attorney General following Rob McKenna, we're different people, different political parties, but there were things that Rob did in that office that I thought were done well. And my mission was to maintain that, okay? Maintain what goes well. So for example, I felt Rob had a fantastic leadership team in the office. His division chiefs, the core leadership team, right? The folks who run that office, I kept them all. That is not normal, okay? For a statewide officer to come in, taking over from a different person of a different political party, and just keep everybody, okay? And in the AG world, that is not common either. But I felt that Rob and Chris Gregoire before ran a professional, nonpartisan law office and had excellent folks running those offices. So I kept them. That was important to me. So I think the goal of coming to any job is maintain what's going well, okay? And look, there are plenty of things the governor has been great on. Issues related to our climate, for example. He's been a true leader on that and continue that expertise. But I've got my own priorities, right? And so at the most basic level, what I would say is in terms of if I'm elected governor and serve for 4 years or whatever period of time it is, at the end, beyond any specific issue that we're kind of talking about, what I would say I most want to accomplish, sort of from a philosophical standpoint, would be to essentially do what we did in the AG's office, but bring that to state government, right? The AG's office, candidly, did many things well, but it did a lousy job of being an advocate for the people. Not because we didn't have good people doing the work, we just didn't have the work done at all. No civil rights enforcement, zero, not a single solitary person in our office. If you called with a civil rights complaint, we referred you somewhere else. We have 800 lawyers, okay? No one did that work on behalf. If you're a farm worker, felt your rights being violated, thanks for calling, call someone else. If you call with an environmental enforcement issue, someone's destroying a wetland or polluting a river, call Department of Ecology, we don't do that. Consumer protection, we had one consumer protection trial in the 17 years before I was Attorney General. We take on the biggest corporations in the world now, routinely, and beat them in court, okay, with that team. Antitrust, we've already talked about, you get the idea. In other words, I felt we had to transform our office to better center the people of the state of Washington, the work that we did. Our mission statement talked about our work representing our state clients, very important. It said nothing about serving you. It was like my first month on the job, like, why is our mission statement not talk about serving the people? That's a part of our work as well, where you're the client. So I think it's fair to say after 12 years, not everybody agrees with everything I decided to do as Attorney General, of course, but by any fair measure, we've completely changed the culture of the office in 12 years that centers the people. The next AG will be doing all the same work that we've been doing and continuing that work. The culture has changed, the way people view our office has changed, and I think that in some ways is the biggest success I feel I had as Attorney General beyond any particular case. When I look at state government, just being honest with you, there's too much damn bureaucracy going on. There's too much industry capture going on with state government. I'm not just telling you, this is part of a stump speech I give all the time as I travel around the state, okay? And we have hard-working state employees who need to be unleashed to better serve the public. In the same way that the AG's office was not adequately centering the people in our decisions, that's my mission as governor, okay, is to change the culture. The examples are numerous, and I won't, in the interest of time, but the ferry service in our state. Good Lord, okay? Do not get the good people of island communities started on our ferry service, okay? And the frustration is not just that, look, I think people understand it's complicated, ferries get old, getting a new ferry takes some time, but when I talk to folks in those communities, what I hear is the state is not being responsive to what they have to say, and the problem is getting worse, and that is deeply, deeply frustrating, okay? This is not some mild inconvenience. I'm sorry, that is a failure of the state in meeting the needs of the people. One reason I'm proposing the head of ferries will be a cabinet level position when I'm governor, okay? So that person's looking me in the eye every single week, okay, to make sure we're accountable to the people. So I'm going on too long on your question, but my point is that's what motivates me about being in politics, is changing the culture to center the people and the work that we do. I'm the only candidate running for governor that does not take donations from large corporations or corporate PACs. Why is that? I want to communicate to the people that my focus is on them and the decision making I make is focused on them. Sorry for the long answer on that, but yeah.
No, fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we earlier had a question on elections. Washington, as you know, has an open primary system, and currently there's a fairly interesting recount going on in one of them. Do you think that Washington should consider ranked choice voting?
I mean, I guess I don't pretend to be an expert on ranked choice voting. I know that and I can double check this and get back to you. My recollection is when I was on the King County Council, I was involved in sponsoring some legislation that did like a review of ranked choice voting. There was a study study's a better word. We did a study of ranked choice voting, and took a look across the country at jurisdictions like maybe Maine, I'm working off memory, which is probably terrible, or Vermont that have ranked choice voting, and to see, hey, would that make sense for King County? Again, this was a number of years ago. So I remember meeting with folks about ranked choice voting and having a sufficient interest to want to sponsor legislation to study that. And I think our takeaway from it was when the state came back as, hey, we didn't think it was really the right fit for King County at that time. So look, I'm always open-minded about how we can improve our system. I think I will say in general, I think Washington State has a good system, and which I appreciate about Washington State. And so I wouldn't rule it out, but I wouldn't. It's not part of my agenda in running for governor. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Ron, anything else?
You have not been shy in sort of nationalizing this election, and it's a gubernatorial election. It's a big seat, right? Big ticket election. You've pointed out many times your opponent's connections to at least sort of the agenda, in your view, of the Trump administration, and talk about having successfully sued the Trump administration. I wonder if that is there a specific reason that you've done that, or does that just come with the nature of politics now, A, and B, has your strategy changed at all in light of what's happened in that national race in the last month?
Like say, I talk about Donald Trump and Dave Reichert because Dave Reichert's being a hypocrite on that issue. So just be perfectly clear, right? Numerous TV interviews, different reporters asking Dave Reichert throughout the first year of the campaign, hey, are you gonna vote for Donald Trump? Are you gonna campaign with Donald Trump? And every answer he gives, he gets a little indignant that he's being asked about Donald Trump, and he says some variation of it, I'm not gonna nationalize this race. Not gonna talk about Donald Trump.
Right.
That's fine. I mean, one can have that approach, right? I may not agree with that. Maybe I think people deserve to know who you support for president, but he was saying that. But when he was speaking behind closed doors, right, to I think it was the Chelan County Republicans and other Republican groups, when he thought you were not listening, when he thought those reporters weren't listening, when he thought the public wasn't listening, when he was asked about Donald Trump there, he was happy to pontificate about Donald Trump, to say he's voting for Donald Trump, to say, and I'm quoting, I love Donald Trump's policies. On policy, we're aligned. To brag about having a signed MAGA hat at his home. So for me, Ron, honestly, like, well, obviously I disagree with his views on Donald Trump, to put it very mildly, right? But just being honest, Dave Reichert lacks the political courage to be governor of the state. That's a fact. You cannot run for any office in which you say one thing to the media, one thing to the public, and something else entirely different when you think you're behind closed doors, let alone on something as important as that. By the way, it's not just my opinion. When the Seattle Times endorsed me, they highlighted that Dave Reichert's doing that on abortion, on choice, right? Where he went into the Seattle Times editorial board and they asked him basically some form of, hey, would you let your personal views interfere with state law? And he said, no, I would never do that. But then the Seattle Times pointed out that before an extreme pro-life group, they quote him saying he would seek to unravel state laws in terms of protections for reproductive freedom. I'm sorry, that's not the way it works, okay? And you've got to be consistent in what you are saying to the people and what you're saying behind closed doors. So for me, whether you call it nationalizing the race or not, I think the people deserve to know that. I think they deserve to know that Dave Reichert holds himself out as some big public safety guy, but yet he supports a convicted felon and a person convicted of sexual abuse to be president. Come on. I mean, it's not, there's a reason why he's not coming here and talking to you guys. There's a reason for it. I'm just being honest with you. There's a reason for it. He doesn't want you asking. He doesn't want you asking. And so, no, I realize it's a hard thing to say to someone. They lack the political courage for the job, but he does. I'm sorry, it's the truth. And look, I got my critics, and as I should, any politician should. But look, I don't think I've ever, say what you will, but I don't think I've ever been shy about leaning into difficult issues. I support banning the sale of high-capacity magazines and assault weapons, proposed that legislation as Attorney General. I don't have to do that as Attorney General. I know when I'm doing that. I'm losing votes with certain people in the state. I know that. But, I feel like that's the right thing to do. I don't shade my views when I'm in Eastern Washington talking to folks when they ask about the Second Amendment. I say, here's why I believe that, okay? If that's a deal breaker for you, I get that, but here are the reasons why you might want to help, might want to support me. That's not Dave Reichert's style, and I think that's going to hurt him in this election. I think that's why he did poorly in the primary.
Thanks.
One last question. We've had a lot of questions about tough issues.
Yeah.
Here's one that's not.
Okay, we'll see. The last question's always, every lawyer knows the last question's the most tricky, yeah.
We've all been inspired by people. Who are your heroes, your heroines?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say for me, someone, and maybe it's a little bit unconventional, so Archbishop Romero, is someone who, big hero of mine. I'm from a Catholic family, and but he, read about him, saw a movie about his life, which is quite inspiring. He was someone who, and what I loved about his story was he didn't start off as some courageous person, right? He was actually kind of a mild-mannered person, didn't want to speak out against the military and what was happening in his country. Didn't view that as part of his role as a religious leader. Was elevated, obviously, to a prominent position in his community and realized what was going on and, changed, evolved, spoke out about it, to put it very mildly, and obviously cost him his life. And but I find, that to be, that his growth as a person and sort of willingness to, that his view was, he was willing to take a lot of risks, for what he believed. But his capacity, I think, for growth is something that I really admire. And so he's someone who I've always admired. The other person more locally, that's a little more on the political side, Wing Luke, is someone I named our Civil Rights Division after Wing Luke. Wing Luke was elected to the Seattle City Council, first Asian American person elected to any office in the Northwest. He used to be an assistant attorney general before he ran for Seattle City Council, died tragically in a plane crash, as you probably know, in his first term as office. The Wing Luke Museum is named after him. And so he's someone who, similarly, I think, it wasn't just a trailblazer, but he was out there on housing issues, that were, fair housing issues. I mean, you picked the issue. He was out there doing civil rights work in the AG's office back when we used to do that work, back in the 50s. And so as a local person, he's someone who I've always had a great deal of admiration for. And it's been an honor. I've gotten to know his family a little bit. His sister, Betty Luke, I've gotten to know quite well over the years. And so it's been an honor to kind of get to know more about his life.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you again for joining us today. We're trying to, this election is one of the most important in our memory, and we're trying to give people the information they need to make a smart decision. So thanks for joining us and helping us with that mission today.
I appreciate you doing this, and for folks who are watching on our website, we have lots of policy positions that put you to sleep at night if you want to. You mentioned there's a lot out there, but on a lot of issues, we're still rolling them out. So encourage folks to check that out as well on issues we didn't get a chance to cover today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Have a great day. Thanks so much.